Okay, so you've sent over this really interesting stuff about dynamic pricing. Looks like it's specifically for an online store selling car parts.
Yeah, it is.
And I think our listeners would be really interested in hearing about this. So let's dive in. What's the big idea here, and what can we learn from this?
Sure. So dynamic pricing, I mean, really what it is automatically changing prices, depending on what's going on in the market. Like instead of having those old school, static price tags, you've got a system that's constantly adjusting things.
Right.
And the material you shared with us looks like excerpts from a project document that actually outlines how to actually build a system to do this kind of dynamic pricing for these car parts.
So it's not just theory.
It's really practical. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess the first question is why would anyone go through all this trouble? What's the point of having prices that are always changing?
Right. That's a great place to start. So for the business itself, there are some pretty big advantages. I mean, one of the biggest is that you can really fine-tune your revenue and profit margins. So think about it. You could charge a little more when demand for a part is really high. Maybe it's a hard-to-find item.
Yeah.
And then maybe you could lower the price a bit when things are slow or when you need to move some older inventory,
So you're not just stuck with one price forever.
Exactly.
You're always adapting.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It's about finding that sweet spot between how much you sell and how much profit you make on each sale.
So it's about maximizing profit, not just revenue.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And it helps with staying competitive, right? Like if another online store suddenly cuts the price of, I don't know, an air filter,
Right.
your system can automatically adjust.
Yeah.
So you don't lose out to them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just about reacting to the competition. You can actually use this to be proactive.
That's right.
So by looking at what your competitors are doing, you can find opportunities maybe to strategically undercut them on certain products.
Okay.
And over time, you can maybe gain market share in particular areas,
So it becomes part of your long-term plan, not just a day-to-day thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. And the document you shared, it also talks about reacting to kind of bigger market forces too, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a problem with the supply chain or if import taxes change or something.
Right. Yeah, those things can have a huge impact on prices.
Yeah.
And with a dynamic system, you can adapt to them much quicker. You don't have to go and manually update every single price in your store.
Yeah, it would be a nightmare to do that all the time.
Yeah, imagine like a sudden tariff increase on some key part for a car.
Right.
Instead of scrambling to update everything by hand, the system can just factor that new cost in, seamlessly.
Right.
Or let's say there's a big surge in demand for a certain part, maybe because of a recall or something.
Right.
The system can respond to that in real time.
Okay. So it's all about being flexible and reacting to those unexpected changes.
Exactly.
And there's another interesting thing mentioned, inventory management.
Oh, yeah.
How does messing with prices help with what's sitting in your warehouse?
Right. So if you have too much of one item, you can lower the price a bit to make it more appealing and clear out that stock. And on the flip side, if you have very few of a popular item, you can bump the price up a little to manage demand and not run out too quickly.
Wow, that's clever. It's like using the price to control how fast things sell.
Yeah, it's like a throttle.
Wow. Okay. And this ties into something else I noticed. Personalized pricing. What's that all about?
So the document talks about tailoring prices to specific customers.
Ah, okay.
So you could take into account their past purchases, whether they're a business or an individual, or even how loyal they've been. So, for example, a longtime customer might get a slightly better price than someone who's brand new.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Or a garage that orders a bunch of the same part might get a different price than someone just buying one for their own car.
So you're really customizing the price to each buyer.
Yeah, in a way.
And there's also this idea of using pricing to encourage people to buy more stuff, right?
Right. You can do things like offer a small discount if they add a related item to their order. So like if they're buying brake pads, maybe offer a deal on brake fluid too.
Yeah.
Or you can create bundles, packages of items that are cheaper than buying each thing separately.
Okay, so it's all about kind of nudging people to spend a little more.
Yeah, it's called cross-selling and upselling. And the goal is to increase the value of each transaction.
Okay, so we've talked about why a business would want to do this dynamic pricing thing. But what about the customer? What's in it for them?
Right. That's a really important question.
Yeah.
So the document suggests a couple of benefits for the customer.
Okay.
First, when prices change based on real-world things, customers might actually feel like they're getting a fairer deal.
So, like, if they know the price is lower during the off-season for a certain item,
Yeah.
it just makes sense to them. Yeah.
It's not just some random price. It's tied to something real.
Exactly.
Okay, and what's the second benefit?
Well, customers might get incentives at just the right time. So think about like a discount on winter tires just before it starts snowing.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe you send a special offer to someone who put items in their cart but didn't actually buy them.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time.
Yeah, those kind of timely incentives can be really effective.
Right. Okay. So we've covered the why. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how the system actually works.
Okay.
The document starts with setting up a database, right?
Yes. The foundation of the system is a database. In this case, on Squite 3 database,
Okay.
and they call it eCommerce.db.
All right.
And the document goes into detail about creating 5 key tables.
5. Okay.
The first one is called products.
Products. All right. And this is where you store all the basic info about each car part. Things like the product ID, the product name, and the base price.
Right.
And they specifically say to use the decimal data type with 10 digits total and 2 digits after the decimal point.
Okay, so they're being very specific about the data types.
Yeah, you got to be precise when you're dealing with money.
Right, of course. What's the next table?
The second one is competitor prices.
Okay.
Pretty self-explanatory. This is where you track what other sellers are charging for the same products. So you've got the competitor ID, the product ID, so you can link it back to your own catalog, the competitor price, again, as a decimal.
Right.
And importantly, a last updated field with the date.
Oh, so you know when that price was last checked.
Exactly, because online prices can change like minute to minute.
Yeah, they really can.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the third table?
It's called tariffs.
Tariffs. Okay.
And this one is pretty simple. It links a product ID to a tariff percentage, which is also stored as a decimal.
So you can factor in any import taxes or duties.
Right. So if a certain type of tire has a 3% import tariff, you can put that in there.
Okay, and then what's next?
The fourth table is seasonal adjustments.
Seasonal adjustments, all right.
So this table has the product ID a month stored as an integer,
Right.
1 for January, 12 for December,
Yeah.
and an adjustment factor, which is also decimal.
What's that for?
This is how you handle price changes that happen at certain times of year.
Oh, okay.
So like you could offer discounts during a summer sale or maybe increase the price on some winter items as the weather gets cold.
So you're saying like you could set an adjustment factor of, I don't know, 0.9 for windshield wipers in the spring to try to boost sales.
Right.
And then maybe 1.05 in the fall when everyone needs them.
Exactly.
Interesting. And what's the last table?
The fifth one is demand supply.
Demand and supply. Okay.
And this uses the product ID to store 2 numbers, a demand index and a supply index.
So this is where you try to capture how much people want a certain product and how much of it is actually available.
Exactly.
Okay. And the document mentions that some sample data was put into these tables. Can you give us an example of what that looks like?
Sure. So let's take brake pad as an example.
Okay, brake pad.
It has a product ID of 1.
Got it.
The base price is $100.
$100, right?
And in the competitor prices table, there are 2 entries for it. One competitor has it for $95, the other for $97. And both of those were last updated on April 1st, 2025.
Okay, so pretty recent.
Yeah. Then in the tariffs table, there's an entry for brake pads with a 5% tariff.
Okay.
And in the seasonal adjustments table, there's an entry for April month 4 with an adjustment factor of 0.95, which means a 5% discount. And another entry for December month 12 with a factor of 1.10, a 10% increase.
It's more expensive in the winter.
Right. And finally, in the demand supply table, the demand index for brake pads is 8 and the supply index is 4.
So that means demand is pretty high and supply is relatively low.
Right.
Okay, that's really helpful to see how all that data fits together for one product.
Yeah.
What about another example? What about like Meritoy air filter?
Oh, yeah, good one. So the Meritoy air filter has a product ID of 2 and a base price of $25.
$85.
And in the competitor prices table, there are 2 entries for it, $21.25 and $20.25. Both also updated on April 1st.
Okay.
But here's the interesting thing. There are no entries for the Meritoy air filter in the tariff seasonal adjustments or demand supply tables.
Oh. So those factors aren't being considered for this product.
It seems like it, yeah. Maybe they just don't apply or the data hasn't been collected yet.
Right.
It's hard to say for sure.
Okay, so we've got all this data organized now. How does the system actually use it to calculate a price?
Right, so that's where the calculated dynamic price function comes in.
Hmm.
This is the heart of the system.
Okay.
It takes the product ID and the current month as input. And the first thing it does is grab the base price from the products table.
Okay, so that's the starting point.
Right. Then it looks at the competitor prices table and calculates the average price being offered by competitors.
Using that AVG function, right?
Yeah. And there's a little safety net built in.
No, with that.
If there's no competitor data available, it just uses the product's own base price.
So it doesn't break the system if information is missing.
Exactly.
That's smart.
Then it goes to the tariffs table to find the tariff percentage for that product.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no tariff set, it just defaults to 0.
Okay.
And it does the same thing for seasonal adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
It looks up the adjustment factor in the seasonal adjustments table based on the product ID and the current month.
Right.
And if there's no entry, it defaults to 1 point. Oh, meaning no adjustment.
Okay, so it's really flexible. It can handle cases where not all the factors are relevant.
Right. And then it gets the demand index and the supply index from the demand supply table.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if there's no data, it defaults to 5 for both.
5 being like a neutral value.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's gathered all this information and it's got these different factors.
Mm-hmm.
Now what?
Now it uses a formula to calculate a demand supply factor.
Ugh.
The formula is 1 plus the demand index minus the supply index times 0.02.
All right, so if demand is higher than supply, that factor will be greater than 1.
Right, which means the price will go up.
And if supply is higher than demand, the factor will be less than 1 and the price will go down.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's how those indices actually affect the price.
Yeah. Then the function calculates something called the market price. This is the lower of 2 values.
So,
Either the product's base price or 98% of the average competitor price.
so it's basically trying to find a price that's competitive, but not drastically lower than everyone else.
Right.
Okay, so that's the market price.
Yeah. And finally, to get the actual dynamic price, it takes that market price and multiplies it by all the adjustment factors.
Okay.
So the tariff adjustment, the seasonal adjustment, and the demand supply factor we just calculated.
So it's like layering all those adjustments on top of each other.
Exactly. And then it rounds the final price to 2 decimal places.
Makes sense. Now, the document shows an example using the brake pad data we talked about earlier. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So let's say it's April 2025.
Yeah.
We give the function the product ID 1, which is brake pad, and the current month, which is April. So it grabs the base price $100.
Right.
The average competitor price is 96 cents.
Okay.
The tariff is 5%. The seasonal adjustment factor for April is 0.95.
Okay.
And the demand supply factor we calculated earlier is 1.08.
Right.
So to get the market price, it takes the lower $100 and 98% of $96, which is $94.08.
Right.
And then the final adjusted price is $94.08 times 1.05 for the tariff times 0.95 for the seasonal adjustment times 1.08 for demand supply.
Okay, so what does that come out to?
That comes out to $103.88.
Wow. So the dynamic price for brake pad in April 2025 would be $103.88.
Right.
And the document even includes a little insight about this calculation.
Yeah, it says, based on an analysis of market competition, seasonal fluctuations, tariff rates, and supply-demand dynamics, this price point ensures strong marketability with minimal buyer resistance.
So it's really about finding that sweet spot that works for both the business and the customer.
Exactly.
So this deep dive has really shown us how dynamic pricing can be a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is.
It lets businesses react to all sorts of changes in the market,
Yeah.
from competitor prices to seasonal trends to supply and demand. It's amazing how all these different pieces of data can be used to make real-time pricing decisions.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated.
And it seems like it could be really beneficial for any online store, especially at a competitive market like car parts.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for explaining all this. It's been really fascinating.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, think about this. Even this simplified model is pretty complex.
Yeah.
What happens when these dynamic pricing algorithms get even more sophisticated? What are the ethical implications?
Right.
And how will customers react to prices that are constantly changing based on who knows what factors?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Something to think about. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
And we'll see you all next time.
See you then.